So in the last video, what we talked about was we created this feature flag admin dashboard. So what this essentially does is it updates an API that we created and uploaded. The data is coming from Firebase, which we also set up. So this is the entire management dashboard that we created. What we will be doing is putting it into practice. So we will have a front end website that we will create, and that front end website will be using feature flags. So whatever is changing in our API via this admin dashboard, we will then update it in here, and then our UI on the front end will replicate that. So this is the final app. We will have a feature flag that shows our featured recipe. This will toggle on or off depending on whether the feature flag is set. And then we also will have a light dark mode theme as well. At the minute, the light mode dark mode theme is enabled over here. So if we refresh the page now, you now see we have a dark theme over here. So this is what we will be doing. If you haven't managed to watch the previous video on how we create this admin dashboard, I recommend you go ahead and watch it just to see and understand the explanation behind everything that we did here. So what we will be doing in this video is creating this UI to render based on the feature flags. So let's get started. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a React application. So as you can see, this is a React application that just fetches data from the API. It can't do nothing else. That is done in the management dashboard we've created over here. So let's go ahead and create this. So it's quite simple. We will just create a V app. So let's do Control R and then search for Vite. So this is if you've done a previous command of Vite. And essentially what we want to do is create a app. So feature flag front end app, and that is going to be npm create v latest with the template of React TypeScript. So we press enter and let it do its thing. And actually, before we do that, let's just command out of this and do nvm use node 20 as well, because we want to be on the right version of Node, and then we can install our app with Vite. So let's just follow all the commands, and you would choose React with TypeScript, and it's as simple as that. So now we just need to do cd of the feature flag front end app that we've created, and then we can do code space dot. This will open the VS Code terminal up for us. What we also need to do is install everything. So let me just quickly open a new terminal, and again, let's just check or use the right Node version. So npm use 20, and then we need to do npm install. So this will install everything in the package.json file over here. And if we can see here, it's got the latest React version that we can use and a few other dependencies that Vite uses, but that's just spinning up the boilerplate. So let it install its thing. Whilst it is installing, let's go in the source folder, and essentially we have the app over here. We have all of these errors just because this is the boilerplate, and what we want to do is actually remove this, and let's just do a H1 just saying the front end app or the feature flag front end app, and anything else we can get rid of, such as the use state. We don't need that as well. So let's just save everything, and let's just double check main.tsx. It renders the app over here as well. So let's save that. And then what we want to do is run npm run start like so, or run dev. But what I want to do is close off my other terminal that I have open with the final app on there, because what we want to use is the localhost 3000. As you remember in the last video, what we did was we whitelisted certain URLs, so only you can use the certain port numbers or localhost or whatever the URL domain name is. And if you want to learn how to do that for your backend API, then watch the previous video. But for now, we'll just keep this here. And then what we will do is now we will do npm run dev. This now spins up the environment for us. So let's just open this. And if you go into here and paste in 5174, press enter, and then we have our feature flag front end app in here. So that is the boilerplate setup. What we want to do is we want to amend this now. So essentially what we will do is build up our components. So the first component we want to build is the recipe card. So what we will do is we'll start with that one. So quite simple. In source, we will create a folder called components, and I also want to create a folder in source, and this is for hooks, because I will be showing you how to create your own hooks to fetch data from an API in React. So this is another method that we can use. So we have two API calls we will make. The first one is the recipes, and the second one is the feature flags. So it will be feature dash flags, and this is deployed on render. So you can see here we have two feature flags enabled. The first one is the featured recipe. The second one is the dark theme, and they are both enabled as true. The recipes, they have ID, title, description of the recipe, the image, and is it featured. So all of them are false except one, which is the tacos, which you can see in this final app is the featured recipe. If this was false, then what will happen is that it will hide this, and we conditionally render that based on whether the feature flag is true or not. Then it will just show the recipes here like so. So that is the APIs. What we want to do is create our components, and the first component we want to create is the recipe card. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go into our code. In components, I'm going to create a new component in here called recipe card.tsx. And in here, we simply just need to do RAFCE for our React functional snippets. And then this is going to be a react.fc, which is a functional component like so. And then essentially that is our boilerplate complete for the recipe card. What we want to do now is we want to add some styles and some copy in here. But first of all, we want an image. So we can create an image like so. And then we also need another div on the side of it, which has the title and description. So let's just do that for now. And actually, let's just see what that renders when we import it into the app.tsx. So in here, we just need to import the recipe card like so. Now you can see it says cannot find name. So we do control space and import and then save. And now what will happen is in our app, we now have the recipe card. It's rendering the title and description and so on. But essentially, we want it to look like this. So we need to add some styles in. So what I will do is I will quickly bring in the styles. So we have index.css. So in here, we will do control A and V. We have the body text, body styles in here. And then we also have app.dark theme in here. And then in app.css, what I also have is all of the styles for the recipe card and everything to do with it. If you want to look at how it's done, then just look in this file over here at the end of the build. But essentially, now we should have a difference in our build, and you can see everything is aligned to the left and so on. What we need to do now is give the divs class names. So again, we can do that. So in our recipe card, we can essentially copy the class names across. So the first one is the class name of recipe card. So that is this class name over here. And then we also have the class name of recipe text, which is the text div over here. And then we also have one more class name, which is for the image, which is this class name that we have over here, which is the recipe image. So now we can save everything and we need to see it in action. So what we can do is we can copy an image. So you can see here that that's working correctly, but we need an image. So what we can do is we can essentially copy this image address and paste it in our code, and hopefully it works. So now if we go in our code, you can see we have created our recipe card. Now it's not perfect because we have some padding and margins in place in the final build over here, as you can see. But essentially, that's our first component complete. Now, what we want to do is we want to, first of all, check our app.tsx. We want two sections in here. The first section is the featured recipe. So if we look in our API, we want to only extract the one that is featured in here. And then the second part is we want to check if the featured recipe is enabled true. So what we will be doing next is working on that. And also we will be building the use feature flag hook to fetch the feature flag along with the recipes itself. So that's what we will be doing next. All right, so what we want to do now is we have these two APIs over here. We want to essentially fetch all the information that we have into our front end app. And then we want to render that in the relevant way based on the data that is in our API on the relevant feature flags. So essentially, let's go in our code, and in hooks here, we want to create two custom hooks. The first one being the use feature flag custom hook. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's close everything down first of all, and in hooks, let's create a file called use feature flag. And this is not rendering any JSX, so this will be .ts. So what we're doing is essentially we're splitting out the component, we're doing all the logic in this file. So we're fetching all of the feature flag information. And then what this does is we can use it and destructure what we return into the relevant component that is rendering the JSX with the feature flag. So that's what the custom hook does. So we can see what Copilot suggests, but a custom hook for feature flagging. So that's pretty much it. So this is just like a functional component. So we can do RAFCE, but what happens is we're not returning anything in JSX like this. So we can delete this for now. This again is not needed, so we can delete this. And actually we'll call it use feature flags because there's a couple of them. And essentially now what we want to do is we want to be able to do what we would do in a normal component, such as the use effects, fetching the information and the data on mount, and then returning that information in a piece of state. And then that piece of state can be used in another component. So, for example, in our recipe card or in our app.tsx or whatever it may be. So, we need two pieces of state. And what I'm going to do actually is bring that in, which is the flags and the error. So when we fetch data, there usually is our errors. So we can set that for now. And then we need a use effect. So again, a use effect. This use effect will fetch everything, and you can see it's doing all of this for us. But what we want to do is we want to update this. So we will use Axios actually. So let's use Axios for this. So let's do npm install Axios, and this is just to get information, so we don't need to parse the response.json and so on, but it's a popular library that a lot of people use. So that is how we would do it. So now instead of fetch, it would be axios.get, axios.put, axios.post, and so on. But in our case, it's just axios.get. So now what I want to do actually is delete everything in here, and we want a try catch block. And this try catch block is going to essentially have our error handling in as well. So we can basically set an error based on the error.message that we get over here. And what I will actually do in this catch block is I will paste in what I have in the final code. So let's save that. And now we have nothing in the try block. So this is where we need to essentially fetch the API data. So we can basically copy what Copilot suggests. But what I want to do actually is I want to destructure the data from our API. So it's essentially await axios.get, and then we essentially fetch our URL over here. But there is one problem, which is that we need to put this into its own function. So this try catch needs to be in a function that is called after the use effect. So, and because this is because we can't actually put async in a use effect in here because of rules of hooks. So this is const, and it's going to be fetch feature flags, which is async, and then we can basically put that in and then render fetch feature flags straight after like this. So now that solves the issue here. We need to also import Axios because we've installed that package. So now we have access to the data that gets returned from this API endpoint over here. So if there is no data or it errors out, then it straight away goes to the catch block in here, and that is basically what gets returned. So now all we need to do is we want to return an object that has flags and error. So if it's an error, we handle that appropriately. If it's the flags, then we handle that appropriately as well. So that is what we would do, but we still need to handle the fetch. So what we will actually do is we will create a object that is then set to the set flags. So this is the structure we want over here. So essentially, we would do array.reduce or data.reduce that we have. Then we would set it to the flagged object like so. So essentially, you can do it many ways or whatever you want to do. But if we use filter, map, and reduce, what essentially happens is it gets the data object and it creates a new object. So this flagged object is a copy of the data. So essentially, because arrays are mutable, so they can be copied, we want to therefore create a separate object that is a part of this. So this flagged object is updates set flag. So that's how it would work. Arrays are mutable, so therefore we should always create copies, which is why we have the spread keyword, for example. And this is going to create a new data object for us, or flags object in our case, that has the key of the feature name and whether it's enabled or not. And if you look at the API, actually, in here, it has the feature name as the key, which is featured recipe. Is it enabled, true or false? That's what we need. So that's the structure we need. And then we now have set flags to flags object, which in turn is returned over here. So now we are able to use the use feature flags hook in here. There's one more thing missing, which is the types. So what I'm quickly going to do is create a types.ts file and simply just paste in the recipe type and the feature flag type in here. So now we've already established the types in the previous video. So now we can use that. And now that is our feature flags hook already set. So what we want to do now is do npm run dev, like so, to restart everything. And then we will open our app up. You can see everything is the same as it is, but we want to inspect and go in console. This is where we want to be able to fetch this information in here and then render it out into our recipe card component. So let's go ahead and do that. So essentially, this is what we are doing. We need to destructure flags and error from our recipe card component, or we can actually do it in the app.tsx actually at the top. And then that way we can pass everything down, and we're fetching it only once in the app, passing it down as props into the components as data. So let me just first of all go into our app.tsx. At the top before the return, we'll paste in the use feature flags hook, and we are destructuring flags and error, but this time we're going to call this flags error like so, because we will also have another destructure of error in the use recipes hook. So let's just first of all console log this, or we can handle it like so. If flags error, show a div with the flags error like so. But what I want to do is just first of all console log the flags and the flags error, and we'll just put a string in there just saying flags. So now let's save it and let's see if it fetches the data that we have. So in our app in here, you can see object, null, and flags. So let's just refresh once more. Now you can see something here has gone wrong. So let's go in the network tab. And I think I know why. It's because when we built this API, it was on a free container. So what essentially happens, we get cold start. So we just need to wait for it to load. So let's just quickly refresh one more time. Let's go in the console. You can see now we've got it here. So essentially, we have the doc theme as true and the featured recipe as true. So let's just check if that is correct. And you can see the transformation has happened now as well. So dog theme is true, featured recipe is true. So that's why we did the array of the data.reduce. So that's how we would transform it. There's other ways of doing it, but the best way is to create a new object with whatever information we need to transform in here. So that's a handy trick to know. So essentially we have doc theme as true, feature recipe as true. So now we need to basically update the UI to emulate this. But what we will also do next is we need to do the same thing we've done, but this time it will be to fetch the recipes. So we will do that one next. All right, so now we've created the use feature flags hook. So we want to do the use recipes hook. So let's go ahead and create that one. It's quite simple to do. We'll just create a new file once again. And this time it's the use recipes or use recipes.ts. In here, we basically copy the same stuff. So let's just copy everything in this file like that and then put it into recipes. There's a few changes we need to do. So we want to fetch the recipes. We need their error as the same. So all we need to do is update the state over here, import the right types that we have. This again is not use features, it's use recipes like so. And then let's just save that for now. We have the URL, which is different also. So that's what we need to update. And instead of fetch feature flags, it's going to be fetch recipes. So again, we can update this. So now you can see the first part is done. Do we need to do this part? We don't, because the recipes are in the correct order, in the right structure. So we can delete this. And then instead of set flags, we just do set recipes to the data that we have destructured over here. And then we want to simply just change this to recipes like so. So now we can save everything, but the only thing that we need to extract is recipes here. So that is it. But what we also want to do is we want to fetch the featured recipes and also the regular recipes so that we can also pass across instead of having to do it in our component. So what we would do is we would do featured recipes like so is equal to recipes.filter. For each recipe we want to return basically the recipe that is featured. And if you look in the API, there's only one in here, which is this one. So that is the tacos. And then we also want the regular recipes. So const regular recipes, we can call it that, which basically is the opposite over here, like that. So now we can also pass them in into this return object here as well. So now basically we've completed the use recipes hook, so we can save that and then put it to use in our app. So in here, what I'm actually going to do is just copy what we have in my app.tsx, which is essentially the destructuring of this use recipes hook. So now we have all of that set, and essentially we just need to log this out as well. So let's console log the feature recipes, regular recipes, and the recipe error like that. So now let's save, and then we will go in our browser and see what has happened with our recipes. You can see over here we have one featured recipe, which is this one, which is the tacos, and we also have the non-featured recipes over here, which is what we need. So, and then we also have null, which is basically for the recipe error, which is fine as well. So that is the recipes complete. There's also a few more transformations we need to do. So first of all, we need to check if dark mode theme is enabled. And again, we could have done that in the flags, but we'll do it in our app.tsx over here. And then the second one is featured recipe enabled as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So it's quite simple. We can either add it into the feature flag hook like we've done here, or we can just paste it in as flags.doc theme, flags.feature recipe, and give it a variable like this. So now what we will be doing next is we will get rendering all of this information out onto the page, and then we will be playing about with the feature flags and toggling them just to see how our UI is updated, and we will do that next. Right, so now that we have our use hook set and we are fetching the relevant information correctly, what we want to do now is just finish off the UI. So let's go ahead and do that. So essentially now I'm going to just bring in my code and then we'll explain what's going on. So we have in the return block over here, we are rendering the div class name here as a dark theme and light theme, which is basically the classes we gave at the start. Then we are handling the errors. If there are any errors, we can basically render them out. If that's not the case, then we will first of all render this section, which is the featured recipe. So featured recipe in here. And then the second section is the normal recipes or the regular recipes, like so. So then we basically each time render a recipe card. In the featured recipe section, we have access to this, which is featured recipe enabled. So that's basically the featured recipe, and there is a length greater than 0. So there is at least one featured recipe in here. Then we render this section, which is the featured section of the featured recipe. We map through all the recipes and render out the recipe card like so. The same again, but in this case, we have access to the regular recipes. There should be at least one in there. If there isn't, then again, we need to do further handling like the one we have done above here. Then we render the recipe card. For each card, we have a key, which is the recipe.id, and also the passing in the recipe to render it out. So there's a few changes we need to make in our recipe card. In here, we need to receive props. So let's go ahead and add the final version in. So in here, we would do the recipe, which is destructured. And actually, that is how we would do it. In the app.tsx, we actually don't need this value over here. So let's delete that is featured, and we'll also delete it here, like so. So now we'll save. We just need to work on the recipe card. So the recipe itself takes in the type of recipe. So in here now, we just need to create this. So essentially, it's an interface that we will create at the top. that is basically getting the recipe from the types.ts file. Then we render this out over here, like so. And then that is how it would work. And now this recipe, now we can update these values that we have in here. So all I'm going to do is bring in the values in here, like so, which is essentially recipe.image URL, recipe.title. Again, the HC has the title and the description. So now let's save all of this, and then let's just go in here, and now you can see we are rendering everything out the way it was in the final build. And now you can see all of the recipes are rendering correctly. We have the tacos, which is a featured recipe. Again, if we inspect, you can see in the console that in the featured recipes, so in here, tacos is here. But if you look at the flags, dark theme is enabled, featured recipe is enabled as well. So that is it complete. But now what we want to actually do is get up our management dashboard, and we will update the UI from our management dashboard. So let's open our app up. In here, we have, again, if you remember, the authentication. So now if we sign in, what we want to do is we sign in. We have access to all of this information in here. What we want to do now, we will toggle off feature recipe. So we will toggle this, and then actually let's disable this, and we will also disable dock mode. So now what will happen is, now that we've done that, we should now see no featured recipe on our front end, and we should also see a light theme instead of a dark theme. So let's go ahead and check that. So now, as you can see, it went from dark to light, and also the recipe that is featured is not showing. So if you look at the API, refresh this API, you can see both of them are false as well. So the dashboard is what manages all of the feature flags, and the front end or the UI that we built has replicated that. So this is how you would bake in your feature flags into your app, and essentially it's basically a boolean value that if it's true you can show it, if it's false you can show it. If we go back into our ways of deployment in the last few videos, we talked about feature flags, and in depth I was going to talk about this one in more detail. There's pros and cons to it, which I've also mentioned, so give that a look and I'll put it in the description. But this is essentially how the front end would use and utilize the featured app. So again, it's based on conditional values that say yes you can show this, or no you can't show this, and so on. You can see now here we are showing all recipes. Sometimes we might have a featured dish, sometimes we won't. Sometimes we want to show the dark theme, sometimes we don't. So that's essentially how it is done. What I would do is I would recommend you would practice this as well yourselves, but this is a fast way of making changes in your application. But again, if you think about it, this object over here can get quite long, and then there's a lot of nested conditions and so on. So you want to think about that before you take this approach in terms of deploying changes rapidly and fast on your app. Again, this is just to showcase how you would implement feature flags into your application. Anyways, I hope you learned a lot in this series about feature flags and try and implement them in your own way, because that's how you will learn. Also, hit the like button and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.